The Minnesota Wild wanted this one more than the Oilers, and they pick up a 4-2 win to start off their West Coast back-to-back. Big performances from Filip Gustavsson, Matt Boldy with a couple of goals. Matt Zuccarello ends the scoring with an empty netter. Marcus Johansson, my guy, what was that? We will talk about everything that happened in tonight's game and what it means going forward on tonight's Locked On Wild postcast. Let's fire it up.
You are Locked On Wild Postcast, part of Locked On Minnesota on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
The Minnesota Wild pick up a 4-2 win over the Edmonton Oilers tonight, and we are live for tonight's Locked On Wild postcast, coming at you after a West Coast game in which the Minnesota Wild get a great goalie performance from Filip Gustavsson. We'll talk a little bit about the cool dynamic with tonight's game in which we saw a couple of defensemen make some key saves to help Gustavsson out. We got a big game from Matt Boldy tonight with a couple of goals, and you could not have looked less disinterested if you were the Edmonton Oilers to start off this game. So a lot to get to. We appreciate everybody tuning in to tonight's Locked On Wild postcast here tonight, and cheers to another game in which the Wilds beat a team that they should. And we'll talk about the fact that now you need to go win the next one against the Seattle Kraken tomorrow night. But Wild with a good start. Thought they had the opening goal of the game as Joel Eriksson Ek scores one that is overturned for offsides. Again, the Wild have another goal overturned. That's like 59 million of them that have been overturned so far this season. But then Matt Boldy, with time winding down in the first period, gives the Wild the lead. The Kaprizov, Eriksson Ek, Boldy line continues to do the heavy lifting here this season. And the Wild did a really good job in the first period of staying out of the box. What did we talk about in the post-game or the pregame show leading up to this game? Is the Edmonton Oilers have a lethal power play. And for the Wild, if you end up going to the box a ton, you're going to pay for it. The Wild did not go to the penalty box at all in the first period. And so good job by the Minnesota Wild of making it be the Oilers that were the team that was headed to the box. In the second period, though, the Wilds get called for a penalty, and the Oilers score 17 seconds later to tie the score at 1-1. But Jonas Brodin with his fifth goal of the season to make it 2-1. Matt Boldy adds his second goal of the game to make it 3-1 at that point. Oilers cut it to 3-2. And after Marcus Johansson goes for the empty net, unless he was... So let me just stop myself right there. Unless Johansson was just trying to get the puck into the corner. That's the only explanation I can come up with for what happened at the end. But beyond that, that wasn't great. Matt Zuccarello did score with the empty net to seal the scoring. So Zuccarello picks up a goal. Filip Gustavsson was the story in this one, 41 out of 43 in the saves department, and the Oilers just continue to pepper the Wild in that third period. But Declan Chisholm came up with a pretty big save, keeping a goal out in that third period. And it seemed like the Wild defensively did a really good job of, when the scrums got dirty in front of the net, just trying to make sure that they were going out of their way to help Gustavsson. But this was a big bounce back performance from Gus after a leaky start in their most recent game. That was, oh boy, when was that? Was that the Vancouver game? honestly, the games meld together at this point in the season. Like we're far enough into this season that everything just kind of melts together. That was the Vancouver game in which Gustavsson just flat out did not have it in that one, but he is able to pick up a big win tonight. 953 save percentage in the game as he's 41 of 43. And, a big thing, a big part of this season and beyond is getting Gustavsson back on track and getting him back to that consistent level. I think we can all agree that what we saw from Gustavsson last year is probably the best that he has to offer. Beyond that, he may not be able to get to that upper echelon level again. But I think it is pretty evident that he can be better than he has been this season. And starts like tonight are encouraging to getting him back towards that level that he was at last season. So a hashtag quality win for the Minnesota Wilds. This is an Oilers team that has been playing some of the best hockey in the NHL throughout the majority of the last bit of the season. And shout out to, that's not the right one. Just had a pretty elite birdie dropped in by Jeremy McDood. O'Donnell mentioned that it was the first game since December that the Oilers lost at home. So credit to the Wild for going in. We talked about the importance of these games in the pregame show, that you have to win both with where you're at in the standings, the amount of teams that you are having to try to leapfrog. And honestly, this was one that I was expecting that the Wild were going to lose going in, but the Wild do have some good history against the Oilers over the past few seasons, and so they continue that success here tonight by picking up a very solid win against the Oilers. And a big key, too, in this game, separator goal. It's something that we have not seen this team be able to do consistently. And what I mean by a separator goal is when you take a 1-0 lead or a 2-1 lead or 3-2 or what have you. When you take the lead, can you get an additional goal, the separator goal, to give yourself a 2-goal advantage and make it that much harder for the opponents to make the comeback? The Wild did that tonight in the second period after they took the 2-1 lead. They get the separator goal from Matt Boldy to be able to hang on and win this game in the end. So that is a key component here for the Minnesota Wild to pick up a win. And apologies here, broke my mic stand a couple of days ago, and it's hanging on for dear life. So let's take a look before we break, and then we come back for your comments. Let's just take a look at where things are at right now. The Minnesota Wilds have leapfrogged the Seattle Kraken and are 2 points behind the St. Louis Blues and the Nashville Predators. So that's where you're at right now. Now, St. Louis has played one fewer game than the Wild. Nashville, even in that department. So the Wild are 2 points out at this point, with another opportunity to potentially put themselves 3 points ahead of the Seattle Kraken if they can beat Seattle tomorrow night, because the Kraken do not play tonight. Hardly anybody did, which is weird for a Friday night, but good opportunity for the Wild to take advantage of the rest of the basically everybody in the Western Conference being off for the night. So Wilds get the win. We got a lot to discuss We'll take your comments. We'll look ahead to tomorrow's game against the Seattle Kraken. A 4-2 win for the Minnesota Wild as they bump their postseason hopes to, I think, 18% now. I think tonight's game gave them a 5% bump by winning in regulation. We got a lot to get to here as we continue tonight's Locked On Wild postcast after this. Tonight's Locked On Wild postcast is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. One of my favorite parts about Indeed, as somebody who is looking for a new gig myself, Indeed will take positions that a company is looking to fill and will find a way to connect their requirements with my qualifications and will give me the opportunity to elaborate, if needed, for particular positions. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Tonight's Locked On Wild postcast is also brought to you by Ibotta. Grocery bills are so expensive these days, but now they don't have to be. Start getting cash back on your grocery shopping with the free Ibotta app and get cash back every time you shop. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. So you can buy that flight you've been eyeing, that game you're dying to go to, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. Join the over 50 million users and earn cash back every time you shop from over 2,700 brands and retailers, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 for just trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONNHL when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONNHL. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONNHL. The Minnesota Wild pick up a big win to start off their West Coast double dip. 4-2 over the Edmonton Oilers here tonight. And let's get to your comments as we work through tonight's win. We've got some good ones here from the cast of regulars. We'll start with B. Why is cross-checking even a penalty? Wouldn't doubt Kaprizov is hurt and will miss some time. So to the first part of the question, that's a good question, because this is something that the NHL has been vocal about trying to clean up without actually doing anything about it. And it's funny because when the NHL initially announced that they were going to start cracking down on cross-checking, there were a couple of penalties here or there. But beyond that, just seems like they kind of ignored it. Now, as far as Kaprizov goes, I did not see him leave the game, which is encouraging. I know he got into the spat with a member of the Oilers whose name escapes me at this current moment, who accused him of diving after a particular cross-check from behind, which is supposed to be a penalty, wasn't called. So I don't know. And with the fact that Maroon and Foligno are out of the lineup, we haven't seen it a ton, but you would expect that teams will try to take some liberties with those two out of the lineup. But I'll keep an eye on Kaprizov's status. John Hines didn't say anything after the game, so it would lead me to believe that Kaprizov should be just fine for tomorrow's game against the Seattle Kraken. Bob joining us tonight. What's happening, Bob? Not sure if it's Carcass and the Coasters or Freddie and the Coasters. How can one player avoid touching the puck unless he's kicking it into his own net? It really does. We talked about this with Amanda for her Wild fan spotlight, and I think this is going to require some further digging from my perspective into what's going on, because it really does feel like Gaudreau is kind of just does not have a spot that really fits on this team. Because, like, let's just look at the number of reasons that can contribute to this. Number one, he was always a Dean Evason guy. Dean played him in the top 6, played him in overtime. Number 3 guy in the shootout. Like, it seemed like had a ton of different instances in which Freddie Gaudreau was very widely used by Dean Evason. And since John Hines has taken over, those opportunities flat out have not been there in the same capacity. Looking at Gaudreau's numbers, like the last 2 seasons since he came to Minnesota and since Dean Evason was in charge, 2 years ago, Gaudreau, when he had 44 points, he had 14 goals and 30 assists. That was the Boldy, Fiala, Gaudreau, absolutely elite down the stretch year. He played 16 minutes, 18 seconds per night on average. Last year, 19 goals, 19 assists, 38 points. He played 16 minutes and 2 seconds on average per night. And now this year, 3 goals, 8 assists in 44 games. He's playing 13 minutes, 54 seconds per night on average. Gaudreau actually played 15 minutes, 52 seconds tonight. Now, 2 minutes, 20 seconds of that was on the power play, 127 on the penalty kill. He managed 10:01 in even strength, which was the exact same as Brandon Duhaime, who had 10:11, and Connor Dewar had 11 minutes, 12 seconds. But, like, he was fourth line guy with Duhaime and Dewar. And it just really doesn't feel like he has a spot where he fits, which is problematic that he was given a 5-year extension based off of being put into higher leverage situations. And so it's either he is hurt to the point that he just is not able to contribute at all offensively, which is a problem, or we are seeing what Freddie Gaudreau actually is and paid him based off of what he did over the last 2 seasons, which was probably not sustainable. Both are problematic in either instance. The main point is that we continue to see it, like we saw it again tonight for the most part, is if you've got one line that is doing the scoring, that becomes problematic. You got to get a second line that can chip in every now and again, and you got to get contributions here and there from your fourth line to help out. It's too much pressure for one line to have. I know they're good players. Kaprizov, Boldy, Eriksson Ek, 3 of the best players on this team. So it's not like they're not capable, but it is a lot of pressure that you're putting on those 3 guys. I mean, look at the Oilers. they've obviously got the top level guys in Draisaitl, in McDavid, in Nugent Hopkins, but you still got Zach Hyman, who is contributing. Evander Kane has 20 goals on the season. And so even though you have those two guys who are like upper echelon, you're still getting contributions from the rest of the lineup. And the Wild just consistently have not been able to do that so far this season. Tonight, Matt Boldy with 2 goals. The stat line for Matt Boldy was great tonight. He had 2 goals. He was a +3 on the night, 7 shots on goal for Matt Boldy in 20 minutes, 51 seconds of ice time. And this is the Matt Boldy experience. You take these stretches and you just, at this point in his career, he is a little streaky. You just have to, I guess, live with the games in which he doesn't contribute, statistically. Because when he's going good, he is good. He's very good. And it's something like, I'm going to find the tweet so that I do it justice, because just trying to guess is not going to do me any favors. Matt Boldy has 21 goals, 38 points in 38 games under John Hynes. So he's been a point per game player for 38 games. And if you want to boil it down even a little further than that, let's just look and see the number. I'm just going to count the number of times and the results of games in which Matt Boldy has not registered a point. So let's go back to the start of the John Hynes era. So Matt Boldy did not have a point against Nashville, but the Wild won. So 1-0. Next time it happened was against Vancouver. That was a 2-0 loss for the Wild. So 1-1. Next time was also against, maybe it's something against Vancouver, because it was against Vancouver again, and the Wilds won that game in a shootout. So you're 2-1. Then no points against Boston in either game against Boston, but they were both wins. So you're 4-1 at that point. Boldy then did not have a point in game 2 against Winnipeg. So you're 4-2. Did not have a point against Calgary or Tampa Bay. So you're 4-4 at that point. 4-5, no points against Dallas, no points against Arizona, 4-6. No points against Tampa Bay, 4-7. No points against Anaheim, 4-8. No points against Chicago, but the Wild won 2. And then no points against Buffalo, 5-9. The Wild are 5-10 when Matt Boldy doesn't record a point. But of the games, so of those 38 games that John Hynes has been head coach, Matt Boldy has not had a point in 15 of them. But to take that even a step further, Matt Boldy has only had, since John Hynes took over, Matt Boldy has only had one instance in which he has gone more than a game without a point. So he may have one quiet game, but then he usually follows it up with at least an assist. And we're starting to see, in the wins against Pittsburgh, Vegas, and Arizona, Matt Boldy scored in all 3. Scored in the Vancouver game. He scored twice in the Edmonton game. So this is, at this point for a 22-year-old, this is just, I think, the next step of the puzzle for Boldy is to just try to cut into those 15 games in which he does not factor in the score sheet. Cut it maybe to 10. That's the next step in his progression. as a young player. And at 22, the hope is that he's going to continue to build, continue to develop, and will continue to add little pieces to his arsenal. The best thing that can happen for Matt Boldy is that he takes a long, hard look at how Joel Eriksson Ek has gotten to the point he's at and goes on a similar path where you just add a little something every season. Let's just try to get 5 or 10% above where you were at. And that's how the good players get to be great. Joel Eriksson Ek thought he scored. They waved the goal off, but man alive, it's every game for Joel Eriksson Ek. He does something that impacts the bottom line. And in this one tonight, he did have an assist, and he did unfortunately commit a penalty, but 20 minutes, 43 seconds of time on ice, one of the leaders on the team in that category yet again. And all the different things that we talked about in the pregame show that he is doing for this team: power play, penalty kill, top line center, critical faceoffs down the stretch. He just continues to answer the bell every time he's asked. Keith joining us tonight. Huge win, 2 big points. Stole that game with some help from Gus Bus. Gus was great down the stretch, especially because it's not as though the Wild were able to keep Edmonton out. They got pinned up at the end of that game, but Gustavsson made some really big saves to keep it tied. And the Wild, they just kind of clamped down there at the end to keep the Oilers out of the net. Gus needs to learn to thank the post like our beloved Flower. There were a couple of weird bounces in this game tonight. Kaprizov had one, was listening to the game on the radio at that point, and Tom Reed exclaimed that Kaprizov, that his shot hit something, but he could not figure out what it was. So Kaprizov nearly got one himself here tonight. And for Kirill, 20-29 for him with an assist. So he continues to just sneakily put up points. Kaprizov is at 59 points in 49 games so far this season. He's on pace for 86. He's on pace for 35 goals, 51 assists on the season. And if you look, he's got 14 points in February already on 5 goals, 9 assists after a 6-goal January and a 6-goal December, and a 5-goal November. So Kaprizov is starting to really stack quality games together, and he's been doing this for about a month now. So it's trending way better for Kirill over a lengthy amount of time here recently. Hate to say it, but Freddie just provides nothing anymore. His one redeeming quality was killing penalties, and he can't even do that anymore. Like he doesn't play a ton on the penalty kill as of right now. And that was one of the big changes that John Hines made when he first took over, was to move him off that unit. And I mean, I don't know. It's going to be a tough conversation for Bill Guerin to have in the offseason, because you're locked into 5 more years of this. Well, 4, but that's not an appealing contract for anybody to really take on. So I don't know what you do about Freddie Evason. For whatever reason, the Wild really hate the Oilers in general. These are games I expect to end like how Minnesota plays Dallas. Yeah, the Wild have made it almost a regular occurrence beating up on the Edmonton Oilers, whether it be Jonas Brodin completely shutting down Connor McDavid or erupting for 7 goals. And a credit to the Minnesota Wild D-core here in this one tonight too. Nobody in the entirety of the D-core, in the entirety of the 6 that played, nobody was in negative territory tonight. Jonas Brodin, Declan Chisholm, Brock Faber, and Jake Middleton were all +2. Dakota Mermis and John Merrill even 0. So credit to even Dakota Mermis and John Merrill, who did not let the Oilers pick them apart in this one tonight. And how about Declan Chisholm tonight? 20 minutes, 35 seconds of play. He got 3 minutes, 27 seconds on the power play. Power play unit wasn't great tonight, but Chisholm just continues to be really solid. And he had a key save to help Filip Gustavsson out in the third period in this one. Just looks like a really savvy pickup by Bill Guerin. And I saw Harrison Lee, the Locked On Jets host, tweet something about Logan Stanley giving up just a hideous goal in that game against Chicago, which the Jets had to squeak out a win in Chicago 3-2 in overtime. And I just kind of laughed to myself because that's the choice that the Jets made, was to keep Logan Stanley as opposed to trying to find a way to keep Declan Chisholm on the roster. And so their pain is our gain. Just looking at some other comments here as we continue through the Locked On Wild postcast. Again, we thank everybody for tuning in to tonight's postcast. 10 of the past 12 against the Oilers, and McDavid didn't have an even strength point. Can we just exclusively play Edmonton in the playoffs? I'd love to see that. I'd very much like to see that. Can I ask that y'all send prayers and good vibes for Will Calverley? Got plastered into the boards against Cincinnati tonight and had to be stretchered off the ice. Prayers up to Will Calverley this evening. Those types of hits are always incredibly scary to see. And so hopefully speedy recovery for him after that hit. This is a good comment from Diane, and I wanted to address this one before I try to get fully caught up. I feel somewhat confused. Should I be rooting for wins? The competitive side of me says yes, but I know I will be singing another tune when we don't get high picks. We've been pretty notably in favor of taking the high draft pick for a while. But the reason that I've kind of changed my tune back, at least have entertained the possibility of the playoffs, because one of the other tricky spots that I try to navigate as host of this show is just trying to be in line with what the team is going to do realistically. Like, this team is not going to bottom out and try for a top 5 pick. And so it doesn't make much sense for me to entertain that if the Wild aren't legitimately going to do that. It would be one thing if the Wild would say, hey, we don't have a chance, so we're just going to do everything in our best interest to try to get as high of a draft pick as possible. Then that makes sense. I may or may not agree with that strategy, especially in this case of continuing to fight and go for the playoffs. But we do need to, and me especially, need to keep this in mind. Even though we just don't see that this team has a legitimate chance to do anything in the postseason, because again, just look at what they've done against the likes of Dallas, Colorado, Winnipeg this season. They have not had a win against any of those teams. But in this business, you are always playing for your next contract, your next job. And so at some point down the line, somebody on this roster, for instance, this Minnesota Wild roster here, you've got all the guys that are unrestricted free agents that are trying to play their way into future contracts. And John Hines, if Bill Guerin is fired, John Hines is probably not sticking around. So he's coaching for his next contract. A good parable to this is what happens to the Minnesota Vikings this season. They fell off the wagon, and it got to the point where it was really looking like they weren't going to have a chance to make the postseason. And so do you lose one game? Do you kind of throw a game away, or do you go down swinging? There are people that are trying to coach for jobs, and there are players that are trying to put themselves in position for new contracts, which is why this team will never actively tank and why the playoffs continue to be the goal, whether we like it or not. And so that's kind of where this is at. I mean, honestly, just if this plays itself out, I just don't see this team having enough left in the tank to be able to get into a postseason position with the number of games that have already been squandered throughout the season. But if they do get there, we're not gonna just shut things down and say, well, didn't want to see the team in the postseason, so we're just gonna close shop, and that'll be that. So we'll follow this team no matter what they end up doing, regardless of if we agree with it or not. And the thing, I guess, is why we kind of introduced the greater good, is to try to pull some of those positives, because I got accused again tonight of being overly negative about covering this team. Greater good exists to try to pull some positives, whether it be a hideous loss to Winnipeg or an exciting win against a team like the Edmonton Oilers. There's always things that you can pull from these games that serve the benefit of the team next year and beyond. And so we key in on those young players. Brock Faber, Marco Rossi, Matt Boldy, those guys that are going to be here for the long haul. And so that's kind of where I try to fill in the rest of the circle. Is we're still going to have that content of, well, here's who's coming up for the Wilds. Here are the things that they need to keep an eye on going up against this opponent. But we're also going to have that long-term focus too. I can do both, and will continue to do both as well throughout the rest of this season. And so let's go to Bob again. Rossi line needs to skate the puck a little further in and watch the dump in. They get going the wrong direction, and then it's on the way back up the ice and no shot on goal. Yeah, it's just an interesting combination down in the bottom six, because I know John Hines raved about what Rossi, Lettieri, and Lucchini brought to the table as a line combination, but I don't know. It was good for a couple of games and was just quiet tonight. I mean, and I know you don't necessarily shots are not the biggest indicator of overall success, but between Connor Dewar, Brandon Duhaime, Freddie Gaudreau, and Vinny Lettieri, Jake Lucchini, and Marco Rossi, which is the majority of your bottom six, one shot on goal between those five players. And Freddie Gaudreau was the one that had the shot. So I think Amanda nailed this in her fan spotlight too. the consistency with those guys is the key. They have a game where they look really, really good. They look great even. And then just go quiet the next. Like, I would rather have a guy look okay to good every night than have great one night and invisible the next. Like, that's what has hurt this team most of the season, is that these guys continue to have these stretches of mostly quiet play, and then a couple of games that are really, really good, and then right back to it. Which is just not, it's not great. I have thought about this too, Quadrum, trying to showcase, because this is the other part of the equation. You've got Marat Huznetdinov, whose season, I believe, is over. I think his season ended this week in the KHL for Sochi. And so theoretically, with no postseason, he is eligible to sign his ELC as early as this coming week. But you've got Mason Shaw on the roster already. If you have Huznetdinov sign his ELC and you burn a year to get him here earlier, you're not just going to have him sit and rot in Iowa. Like, you're going to have him play. So you have Shaw, you have Huznetdinov, you have Marcus Foligno, who is going to be coming back at some point. You got Pat Maroon, who could potentially be coming back at some point as well, in addition to the 6 guys that are already playing in the bottom 6. It does feel like there's going to need to be some sort of move other than sending a couple of guys down. It feels like there is going to have to be something done to free up this logjam. And so maybe by playing a guy like Marcus Johansson in the top 6 as much as he has, is to hope that he can put a stretch of 3 or 4 games together where he maybe gets a few points and chips in a goal or two. And that Guerin can get somebody who will say, you know, he signed for $2 million. He does have a pretty much full no move. I think it's a 16 team, if I recall correctly. 16 team no move, I think, for Johansson. But you might have a team that's not on his list that says, I'll bite. I'll give that guy a shot. It does feel like Bill Guerin's going to have to try to move somebody to just free up a spot. How exciting is it to think Yurov is putting up better numbers than Kaprizov in the KHL? Can you imagine what having another Kaprizov on this team would do? It's especially exciting, Hoptics, considering the fact that Yurov plays a bunch of center too. They're trying to kind of profile him as a center. Ultimately, he probably shifts to a wing, but the fact that he is continuing to push the envelope, and we talked about it when we looked at Scott Wheeler's prospect rankings for The Athletic. Yurov is in the same tier as Jesper Wallstedt with where he's currently at with his developments, which means that he is profiling from being more of just this is a guy that's going to make the NHL and is going to be a player. He may not stand out as much, to this is a guy that is going to do some things at the NHL level. And so if Yurov can continue that development, because again, he's only 20, he's 20 or 21. If he can continue that development, continue to raise the roof, I don't know why I'm raising the roof right now. If he can continue that development, then he can maybe even hop up a tier to where he is one of those players that you're like, okay, this is a guy you can build around. And I think that's a big part as to why Kaprizov would be intrigued to stick around, because Yurov is one of those players that comes around once in a great while. And if you can have him be a complement to Kirill Kaprizov with Matt Boldy, with Joel Eriksson Ek, all of a sudden you've got a pretty solid top six if you can just add a couple of pieces to that mix. So I'll say it again, even though even to echo what I said in the prospect episode, I think Yurov is the key to all of this. If he does develop, if he does hit at the level that he's expected to, massive impact player for this franchise. So whether Yurov decides to stay in the KHL for another season, whatever is going to improve his development the most, I don't think even if he went to Iowa next year, I don't think it's likely that we would see him next season. But beyond that, I think it's likely that 2 years from now that we see him here and we don't have to wait for him to get called up. I think he just outright makes the team. Time will tell. Are any of the media people asking these questions? Why are the likes of Freddie and JoJo still playing? They need to start asking Hines straight up why the scrubs play and the studs are benched. I know Hines was asked specifically about Marcus Johansson in this regard. And the response was that that Johansson is skating really well, which I feel like is a really polite way of saying he needs to contribute in other ways. I don't know. Unless it is legitimate and honestly an attempt to try to showcase a guy, we just have seen for a long stretch of games. There was a tweet today about the fact that Johansson has 1 point in his last 9 games and like 6 shots in that entire span. Yeah, here it is. Since he scored 2 goals against his former team, the Washington Capitals, Johansson had 1 point, and that was back on January 23rd. So in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So he has 2 points in 10 games. And in that same span, he has 7 shots in 10 games. It just isn't enough. It's not enough. There needs to be more contributions. Go to the net. Go be a body in front of the net. Go try to screen a goalie on a goal or something. That's all I'm asking. Can you talk about and shed some light on what Riley Heidt is doing in the WHL? He's probably going to average 2 points per game this season. Isn't that absolutely insane? He has already, glad you brought this up. He has already reached his point total from last year this season. Already has. And honestly, I think that was probably that was one of the biggest steals of Judd Brackett's tenure as draft guru for this team. The fact that Riley Heidt was still available in the second round last year, Stramel pick aside, the fact that Heidt was still available in the second round and the Wild were able to grab him is massive. You can never have enough players like that. And he profiles as a guy that's going to be a hit with, I think, the opportunity to be better than that. I love that pick still to this day. I loved that pick at the time that the Wild made it. I was way out after the Stramel pick. And I've walked myself back Like, I'm going to give Stramel the opportunity to get to the NHL level before I throw any judgment there. Got slaughtered for that take on draft night. But I loved the Riley Heidt pick from the moment it was made. And that is not going to change. So the fact that he is lighting it up in the WHL is very, 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 very nice. Just trying to catch up on the comments here. Just to see. Bold prediction. Wild will keep beating top teams, but lose 6 to the Sharks, Coyotes, and the Ducks, and barely miss the playoffs as a result. Would not surprise me at all, because the Wild have squandered so many opportunities this season that it just, like, when the season is over, there's going to probably be an episode. Let's just say, let's just throw a number out there. Let's say the Wild missed by 4 points. Because of the type of person that I am, there's going to be an episode in which I go through and I say, where could you find 4 points? And we'll just go through every game in which a point was squandered, because there have been plenty. Think back to the Buffalo game, not 3 games ago, where the Wild had the lead with under a minute to play in the third period and could not hold the lead. That's a squandered point. And that is what this season is going to come down to. So, like, we're just gonna continue to march through to the very end, and it'll either be game 3 or it'll either be game 79, 80, 81, or 82. Gotta have it, and just will not be able to get it. Like, okay, so the 1 point against Buffalo, the game against the Anaheim Ducks on January 27th, right before the All-Star break. Game against Philadelphia on January 12th, where the Wild had the lead going into they had the lead in the third period, and Philly scored twice. It was either once or twice to tie it, and then won it in overtime. That's another one. Just trying to look for a couple of others. How about that shootout game against Ottawa in Sweden, when the Wild are playing like not really that great, and yet that was the best game that they had played in like a week or two. Could not find a way to close that out. The Washington game against the Capitals, 3-2 shootout loss. 5-4 loss to Columbus. Columbus was on the second night of a back-to-back in that game, if you will recall. And they had like 55 shots on net. The Wilds had not played the Wild were on regular rest. And that's another squandered opportunity. So there's like 6 games just right off the top right there that you could have some good opportunities to have the points that you need. How many problems would be solved if the first line right now had been together all year? You know, it's It's a good question. But here's the only, so this top combination is obviously clicking tremendously well. The only question that I have with doing this combination, like to start the year, is does that alter the course of Marco Rossi's season at all? Because let's not forget, Marco Rossi getting some opportunities with Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Zuccarello on that top line kind of helped get him going. So if you don't have those same opportunities for Rossi, what does his season look like? And not saying that Rossi would not have been able to figure it out anyway. I think he's playing well enough this season that he still would have been able to, but getting some opportunities with Kaprizov to kind of get his confidence up, I think is a big reason as to why Marco Rossi is, at least was last check, tied with Connor Bedard in rookie scoring with 17 goals. Not in rookie points, but in rookie goals. So that's the only question I have about the current top line makeup. But beyond that, like, keep it going. Don't panic. Don't panic like you did against Winnipeg and yank that line combination out for like 30 seconds, then put them back in. Just keep them consistent, because as our beloved captain notes, first line is the opportunity to win 3 stars of the week. Let's just do a little stats dive here as we hit midnight and are just about on a full 60 minutes of breaking down tonight's game and taking a look at all sorts of things in tonight's Locked On Wild postcast. Minnesota Wilds all go since February 7th. It's 14 points in 7 games for Kirill Kaprizov. It's 13 points in 7 games for Joel Eriksson Ek. It's 11 points in 7 games for Matt Boldy. Ever since those guys have been put together, it's 2 points a night for Kaprizov, 1.86 points per night for Joel Eriksson Ek, and 1.5 for Kaprizov. Where does that stand? Where does that stand amongst the rest of the NHL? You might ask. Kaprizov is 4th in the NHL in that span in points. Connor McDavid is 2nd in the NHL in the last 7 games with 17 points. Precisely 0 of those are goals. He has 17 assists in the last 7 games. That guy's just on another planet so far this season. Joel Eriksson Ek is 7th in the NHL in the last 7 games. And Matt Boldy is 10th with 11 points in the last 7 games. Now let's take that from the 18th to now. Kirill Kaprizov is leading the NHL in points, not counting tonight's game. Thank you. Because the NHL is not quick enough to put the stats in real time. Leading the NHL in points. So I think Kirill is probably going to get your number 1 star. But don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if Joel Eriksson Ek doesn't get 3rd star. Mitch Marner has 8 assists this week in 3 games. What's with all these all assists, no goals performances by all these guys? Who knows? It's weird. Let's let's finish up tonight with a little look at what's coming up for tomorrow's game against the Seattle Kraken. MoneyPuck.com taking a look at tomorrow's matchup. The Kraken have a 58% chance of winning tomorrow night's game. This is a big game for the Minnesota Wild once again. They're all big games. If the Wild beat the Kraken, they will have another 5 percentage point bump in their playoff hopes. So they'll be above 20%. I'm seeing a lot of comments. Ian, I got you. I think it's time. I think it's time for a bottom six shuffle. Let's see what Mason Shaw's got in the tank. Secondary scoring, you need it. You need it at this point in the season. The Kraken are the Kraken do not fly as high as the Oilers do. Perfect opportunity to get Mason Shaw in. It's going to be more of a physical game. You're not going to have to be running for your life to defend the likes of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Let's get Mason Shaw in. You can also move him in on the penalty kill too. Give it a shot. Why not? What do you have to lose at this point? Certainly not another game. You've done that plenty so far this season. I want to finish with this. Is anyone else terrified that if the Wild beat the Kraken, the Blues, and the Predators, and Bill Guerin goes into buyer mode? Yeah. That would be... So, oh boy, this one really put me in a pretzel. Because I don't even want to entertain the possibility of this. My hope is that Declan Chisholm was the buy. That's my hope at this point. Was that Declan Chisholm was the buy, because we heard it for the weeks leading up to the trade deadline that the Wild needed some help on the blue line. Chisholm has looked promising in his games so far. I would be willing to accept another buy if it means that somebody currently on the roster not holding their weight is moved off. Like, let's clean up some of the clutter here. This is an episode of Hoarders. You're going into the house for the first time. You're like, oh my God, this is a disaster. We need to get rid of some of this clutter. So this is the part of the episode of Hoarders where you go in and you remove all the junk before you get in and you can start cleaning the house. If that ends up happening, I can be talked into that. But again, we are then moving dangerously close into the, like, hey, we're really going for this. Because what did we learn tonight? Or actually, no, this was the most recent episode of, or no, it was actually tonight. Arizona Coyotes general manager officially declared that his team was going to be a seller at the trade deadline. So one of the Western Conference teams that was pushing for that wild card spot is out. Arizona Coyotes are out, which leaves your Minnesota Wild, the Calgary Flames, the Seattle Kraken, the Nashville Predators, and the St. Louis Blues, all fighting for that wild card spot. And outside of the Seattle Kraken, like we talked about with Lou Nanny's most recent hit with Dan Barrero on KFan, the Wilds, because they have fewer wins than Nashville and St. Louis, they have to have more points than them. So you have to end up with more. Like, you can't get into a situation where you're tied in points. You have to have more points than St. Louis or Nashville or Calgary. If you can do that, I guess go for it. But it does not seem like it's going to be anything that will lead to any sort of legitimate postseason run, because they just haven't beaten anybody at the top of the West. So I don't really want to entertain any of that buying notion, but I'm not the GM. If the GM decides that's what he wants to do, we'll react accordingly. You are only as good as your next win. And so what did we talk about after the Vancouver game? You got to follow it up with another win. And so Seattle's on tap later tonight. You got to win that game. If you do, then you got to win the game against the Hurricanes. It's that simple at this point. Until you can get yourself above water, you just have to keep winning. And every time you slip, you fall further behind. So we'll see. But I think that'll do it for tonight's Locked On Wild postcast. The Wild get the win 4-2. We got another one coming up for you tonight after the Seattle Kraken game. But again, I'll say it over and over and over again. You got to win the next one. Otherwise, the one that you just won doesn't mean really a hill of beans of anything. So go beat the Kraken and then follow that up with another win. We'll talk about whatever happens on tonight's Locked On Wild postcast. So until then, thank you to the late crowd for tuning in to tonight's postcast, and make sure to enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and we'll be with you after the game against the Seattle Kraken. You can find new episodes of Locked On Wild by subscribing on your favorite podcast platforms. Also, make sure to hit the like button before you head out for the night, and make sure to follow us on YouTube as well. You can find more of these Locked On Wild postcasts plus full episodes by subscribing and following along with us with new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.